Quite intense, huh? So why don't we do a round of introductions, starting with you, Sreeram.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sreeram, founder at Eigenlayer, also at the University of Washington, Seattle, where I run the University of Washington Blockchain Research Lab.
Hi, I'm Carl Hua, CTO investment partner at Shima Capital.
Hi, I'm David Shea, founder of Babylon Chain, and also a professor at Stanford.
And I'm an investor with LBank Labs, a new fund that was launched at the end of last year. So let's get started. The first question is going to be for you, Sreeram. So you like to think of yourself as a marketplace for trust, where it can be traded, bought, or sold, rented or supplied to anyone who wants to consume it, to be built at an infrastructure layer. Could you talk about the security as a service component of Eigenlayer and the restaking?
Yeah. Eigenlayer is a mechanism to take the root of trust of Ethereum. The root of trust of Ethereum is staking. And we want to supply that root of trust to anybody who's interested in consuming it. So if you think of like all of crypto or blockchains, like the essential ingredient of crypto is decentralized trust. And what we want to do is to create a marketplace for decentralized trust. I know we in this community are all passionate about, for example, decentralization, right? But decentralization is a public good that is not necessarily incentivized. But when you have a marketplace for it, people will pay for the aspects of trust that they actually want to consume. So Eigenlayer restaking platform enables stakers to download, run any other services, chains, modules on the common trust platform. And anybody who wants to build off of it can come and build on it. So it's a two-sided marketplace because it matches stakers who have produced this quantity called decentralized trust and supply it to the builders. So that's the two-sided market.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great intro. Over to you, David. So you are a professor at Stanford as well as the co-founder of Babylon Chain. Can you please give us a use case scenario that is optimal for Babylon Chain's security guarantee, or better yet, how is the security shared from Bitcoin?
OK, so maybe say a few words about the project first.
Exactly.
Before I go into that specific question.
Yeah.
So Sreeram was just talking about sharing the security of Ethereum. Ethereum is only a very important chain. That's why we're here, East Denver. But there's another very important chain out there, guys. It's called Bitcoin, OK? Bitcoin is kind of an old-fashioned, I know, it's like OG of blockchain. But you know, it's been around for 14 years. And we're talking about security, the track record is pretty good. So our project is to basically say that, hey, Bitcoin, such a good resource, public resource, we should use it not only for Bitcoin transactions, but for the rest of the world. Hey, for us, the world is the crypto world. And so our project is to find, we design a bunch of protocols, technologies, to extract the security from Bitcoin and use it to secure many other chains, particularly application-specific chains, which is really focused on their applications, but perhaps would appreciate some additional external form of security. And so that's what we've been working on. We've been integrating with the Cosmos ecosystems. We now have 8 chains, 8 Cosmos chains on our testnet. Now, going back to the use case, so there are many possible use cases of this Bitcoin security. But one use case, just to be concrete, which, for example, Osmosis is very interested in. We just integrated with them, a proposal with them, which is to reduce the, so staking, you mentioned staking, has one drawback. So when you do mining, when you want to stop mining, you can stop immediately. But staking, there's a very strange phenomenon, which is you cannot unbond immediately. You cannot remove your stake immediately. So in Ethereum, right now, you cannot remove your stake at all at this point, at all. So it's infinity. But in many chains, it's a long time, multiple weeks.
Shanghai is coming up. So
Shanghai is coming up, but it's not there yet.
We got to wait.
And God knows how many people are rushing to unstake Queue will be very long. All right? So we can reduce the unbonding from weeks to a few hours up to 1 day. Everybody can reduce the unbonding, right? You just change a parameter, but we do it in a secure way using Bitcoin security. So that's a use case, one use case.
OK, great. So over to you, Carl. In relation to this question, how do you evaluate the security of the products you invest in? Can you please share some advice for budding investors out there?
Yeah, so for Shima, we do things a little differently because of the unique background of the tech team, right? So I used to work for JPL NASA. We built flight software, and before that was aerospace. You only get one chance to get it right before people start dying, right, out of the aircraft, wherever. So when we look at the projects, right, we think about it in multiple dimensions. First is what's your best practice, right? GitHub. We look at your GitHub. But that's really the last stage of your entire design. So if you're telling me you don't have design artifacts, go to GitHub, look at your code. It's already a yellow flag, right? Because security is not patched on. Security is designed in, right? So for example, Eigenlayer and so forth, they're thinking about the security at a very fundamental place, which is how do you design the security as part of the protocol? As you can see, a lot of these hacks these days are not system-level hacks. They're very simple hacks, such as exposure of your private key, simple GitHub mistakes, right? So when we look at projects, we want to understand the mindset of the founders. Where do you have the right mindset, right? No offense to Meta or Facebook, if your mindset is move fast, break things, and you're engineering Eigenlayer type projects, then it's probably not great. So that's how we kind of mechanize the due diligence process.
Yeah, there's a question that's a follow-up to what you just said. So except for code safety, some attacks happen off-chain, as you mentioned. So like private keys getting stolen or team split, which are hard to solve with code. What are your thoughts about those?
Yeah, so it's a completely different vertical, right? So you have system-level design, which will impact the security of the entire chain. As a matter of fact, most white paper in this industry are talking about those type of problems, which is consensus-level problems, validators colluding, and so forth, which are the biggest problems in this field is that we need to think about at a holistic view, right? However, most of the hacks today have yet to compromise the system at that level. Not saying that they will not be compromised. It's just I think really, really sophisticated people or entities or institutions that are enemies of us are not even thinking about doing that because the entire market cap is less than $1 trillion. Imagine tomorrow we have a $100 trillion market cap. You bet these type of actors will present themselves, right? But as of today, the system level security is one thing we need to think about, but also the DevOps side of security, developers, operational security, these are not taken very seriously, right? The biggest hack is really dumb. It's essentially the developers just like got hacked and they have the private keys leaked, right? So there's different verticals of security.
Yeah, it is relevant, however, yeah. So back over to you, David. So what are some of the best practices to ensure security through a high-rigor engineering development process? And then I'll ask the same question of you, Sreeram.
Yeah, so I do agree with Alex that security should be done as the first principle and not hack together a bunch of stuff and then try to patch it up when people have attacks on your protocol.
Right.
So that's what we do at in Stanford is that first you should ask yourself, okay, what is the security model that you want to design your protocol against? Okay? Once you have a security model, then you can try to design protocol to achieve that security. And then once you have that protocol, then you can build it. So that's what we did at Babylon. We have a protocol, which is a peer review in the top security conference. And actually, it's a collaboration with Sreeram, great collaborator. Shout out here. And yeah,
Awesome. Thanks, David. David was my postdoctoral advisor at Stanford, so we go back a long way.
Hey, please don't tell people this, man. Reviewing our age, please.
No ageism here. In crypto, we don't discriminate. I agree with both the viewpoints, but I want to bring a kind of like another viewpoint to this thing. If you look at crypto today, we are looking at immutable code. Okay, we're looking at immutable code. We're all passionate about censorship resistance. Okay, which means everybody's transactions gets in. There's immutable code, censorship resistant, and there is a lot of money. This is a very potent combination for hacks. So I think we cannot minimize the security, the difficulties in actually building a system that is going to be secure in this world. This is a combination that has never existed before. Immutability. You send the money once, you hack the money once, you hold it forever. Censorship resistance. Even if I detect that this transaction is a hack, I have to include it, or somebody else will include it. And a lot of money. So it is a very, very hard security model in which to build. Despite having airtight, theoretical papers, translating them into airtight code is extremely difficult. So, we have to concede that. So the questions that we ask are like, how do we trade off? Why do we want immutability? Why do we want censorship resistance? We want self-organizing emergent systems that, have trust. But, the implementation barrier brings some kind of issues to how these theoretical models are translated in practice. So we have to bring systems in the meanwhile which merge some amount of subjectivity, human subjectivity, and take objective code on the other side and merge them in the right ways. I think this is something that as a community we should debate and understand how the trade-off between objective, censorship-resistant, immutable code and human subjective mechanisms, things like circuit breakers, exist in Wall Street. What is the analogs of them in crypto? How do we build bridges which have internal metering and circuit breakers? What happens when we do detect that there are hacks and money from a hacked bridge has come into your DeFi protocol? What should be your course of action? I think we should spend a lot of time thinking about some of these questions downstream, assuming that an attack does happen, because it'll happen, despite our best efforts in preventing it. So that's one view that I want to.
So this is an interaction between the code layer and the social layer.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not really formalized.
It's not at all formalized, and I think we need to think through how we formalize this.
So that's a really good point. I was chatting with David. So in aerospace, right, no one's scared of flying here, I would presume, right? What if I told you you have a 10% chance of the aircraft falling out of the sky? No one would be buying airplane tickets, right? So on an aircraft, you actually have redundancies, and they're actually running consensus among each other, each of the computer, right? That's why it's super reliable. If one computer fails, the rest of the three computers continue, right? So you have redundancy, and the beauty of this is they have an extremely high rigor when it comes to translating what should be happening to what is actually the code is doing, right? Extremely little loss between requirements and what the code is actually doing, and that's not what the world we live in with blockchain, right? Usually, a lot of times you go see the white paper, it's somewhat sound, but when you go look at the implementation, it's completely doing something else, right? So if we can formalize that connection, which is somewhat a solved problem, but very expensive, that's why it costs so billions of dollars to manufacture an aircraft design, then we'll get to a place where the intended implementation is actually doing what the design intends to do, right? And we're not there yet.
So one way of thinking about this is, I think, there are fundamental security risks. Oh, you didn't design a secure protocol. There are smart contract risks, things, or implementation risks. There are issues in implementation. But if you add on any kind of a human subjective layer, you have governance risks. And there are trade-offs between these things. By increasing governance, you can reduce implementation risks. By making zero governance, you may have high implementation risks. So I think we need a very nuanced conversation in the space about how to trade off these risks in the correct manner.
Okay, going back to my questions. Thank you. When users transfer assets across chains, what standards are used to judge its security? And this is kind of an open question for everybody, but standards.
I just want to say one thing that like both David and I, like Babylon and Eigenlayer, one thing that we've done is so a lot of interchain and cross-chain communication is about moving data, and I think we are just at the frontier of moving trust and security across chains. So we not only want to transport data, we also want to transport trust. We want to transport security because that is one of the fundamental ingredients that we produce in this blockchain space. So when we're talking about standards for cross-chain communication, there's also this extension of like standards for cross-chain security, so that show up. But in terms of the standards, of course, outside the Ethereum ecosystem, the Cosmos has pioneered this great IBC standard, which is a proof of consensus. You communicate to each other that you've done consensus. But that is only one dimension of security because the bridge is still only as secure as the weaker of the two chains. And when you have a multi-IBC world where any one of the chains could be bad, then you may have like contagion through the system. So we need to think about like second-order effects of multi-chain ecosystems where the weakest link may be problematic. David, do you want to?
Yeah, so that's right. So bridges are kind of interesting because they're designed for token asset transfer. But actually what we discovered in our project is that it can also be used for trust transfer. And when you transfer these trusts, you can also use the trust to secure the bridge. So for example, instead of the minimum of the two chains, you can have perhaps a sum of the security two chain. Now that's an improvement. And actually that can be achieved. Another thing is you can use also a third party, a third chain, to secure the bridge between two chains. For example, my favorite chain, of course, Bitcoin, but also potentially, Eigenlayer cross-staking as well.
Yeah, so imagine you're bridging from Bitcoin to Ethereum, right? I would argue, as of today, the weakest link is actually the bridge itself. And you have this thing called perpetual risk, right? And that's also why institutions don't want to deploy in DeFi today, is when you bridge from one to the other end, there's the risk of like during the bridging and so forth, but that risk never ends, right? When you go sleep, the risk is still there because if the bridge is compromised, it's likely that there will be loss to either side based on how you bridged, right? So that's very important to understand is that as of today, sure, there's new ways coming out. For example, Circle's CCTP, which eventually will reduce the perpetual risk. But as of today, unless we can secure the bridge, for example, Eigenlayers would be a great way to do this. You can transfer the trust from Ethereum to Eigenlayer, and then then you can now secure the bridge using the amount of assets that's restaked. However, today, the security of the bridge is not that high because the low market cap, perhaps, of the bridge itself. So that's actually the weakest link today, in my opinion. But we're moving towards the right direction, right? In the future, we'll have much more secure cross-chain messaging mechanism, which will allow us to sleep better at night, and hopefully we'll get more institutional adoption.
Okay, final thoughts. What is the future of cross-chain? Is it an oligopoly or poly-poly, or will each public chain have its own cross-chain method?
What's a poly-poly? What's
Well,
a poly-poly?
I think as long as we're talking about cross-chain, then we're still very early, right? Because no one talks about what ISP you use. Oh, is Verizon better than T-Mobile? Wait a minute, I'm on AT&T, I'm better than you. So I think in the future, I generally think it will be a collaboration because, for example, Axelar is great with Cosmos and Axelar is expanding to different ecosystems, but there are some ecosystems that some of the other brands are working on as well, right? So in my opinion, in the future, you will have a transparent cross-chain capability across all the blockchains, but the parties serving these blockchains will be different projects, and they perhaps one day can intercommunicate with each other without going back to the blockchain. So.
Okay.
So bridges without chains.
Bridges,
Only
talking
bridges.
to bridges without going back to the first layer.
Okay.
For better routing.
All right.
final thoughts on the question or any
No,
other
I
final
think
things?
that thought is already quite deep. I don't
Okay,
know what to say.
sure.
I was thinking about it tonight.
I think what we'll see is an emergence of a stack rather than like one standard. I think the more important thing would be what is the modularization of the bridging stack? Is there a relaying? Is there a relaying layer? Is there a validation layer? You know, is there a liquidity layer? Is there an execution and programming layer? And some layers may get standardized earlier than the others, and other layers may get swapped out. You know, this is going to be the interesting thing, is discovering the boundaries of these layers. So instead of thinking about which bridge to standardize or like which particular, we need to think about like what is the modularization of the bridging stack so that we have maximum rate of open innovation. So coming back to my favorite theme at Eigenlayer, we want to maximize the rate at which like innovation happens in the space, and that's what all of crypto has been about, like permissionless innovation. So hope to see that in the bridging as well.
Awesome. I think we're out of time. So thank you all for joining this panel.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.